hobby, like learn to knit or go cook something. Go outside and get some fresh
You are
air.
gay.
When you start debating, whether or not you believe somebody exists, you are in too deep and you need a break.
Yep. No, and it's Morgan. It's also a running joke in the Great Debate community that because people like to suck Steve into the whole definition.
Boy, I'm glad you added something to that.
And
Yeah,
so
I was like,
stop that
fucking
mid-sentence.
Steve,
That would add
where?
a whole new dynamic.
it's like this running joke. It's like, oh shit, somebody mentioned that to Steve again. Oh fuck.
Uh-oh, Dave. Hi, everyone. Steve.
Hi, Kyle.
I don't want it to be, I don't want to be a product of my environment. I want my product to be an environment of me. They pick the number. That's tonight's opening line. If you can guess which movie that is from, then you are a step ahead of everyone tonight.
I'm just going to say Fight Club because everything always goes back to Fight Club.
Close.
Really?
Not really.
Okay, not really.
Did you want to did you want to say something?
Yeah, well, I mean, people may have noticed, our opener there. Recently, a dear friend of all of ours to the Great Debate community, Heretic Woman, also first name's Deborah. She passed away in her sleep. She was a well-known atheist activist that went along to various hangouts or went into hangouts and many of these forums and these events. She was a wonderful, wonderful woman. I considered her a great friend. She was the inspiration behind the podcast, Atheist Beyond the Trailer Park. And I'm going to miss her laugh. I mean, she had a very infectious laugh. She was always pleasant, always had a smile. It's kind of disheartening that was a kind of a crappy way to start off the year with another death in the Great Debate community.
Absolutely. She will definitely be missed, that's for sure.
But let's dedicate this show to her because, I mean, I knew her well enough to know that she would want us to like do something kind of entertaining in her name. So let's kind of like launch this kind of episode. And before we do, though, you were on vacation for a while. So I noticed you had a picture of you and your man on there, but how'd that go?
Oh, yes. It was fantastic. I figured that because I feel like you and I chat are getting closer, that I can share some of these touching moments with you guys. So I'm just going to plaster him all over the screen. This was us. We had a fantastic time.
I think it's called gloating.
There's him with puppies.
He's fine. Look at my man.
The great thing was we had a we've everybody's got a song that you find cute together or whatever. Ours was Chasing Cars by Snow Patrol, and I'm just gonna let you see this. And yes, you're right. It is the Departed movie. Bingo.
Did I miss something?
That's the biggest dog I've ever seen.
Did I miss something you sent me?
It was just a karaoke video. Well, he surprised me by singing karaoke. We went to a karaoke bar and he sang Chasing Cars. It was beautiful.
Is that a dog or a wolf?
Because the only
that is
I've got a picture. I've got a picture of you.
No, it's in Messenger. It's right above our guest's avatar.
Right, it's not giving me a video with that. It's a picture. It's a static picture. It looks like a screenshot of somebody trying to play a video. But anyway,
nonetheless, we will by the end of the show. I tell you what, when we close out, guys, I will show you the video, but I just thought that I would share a little bit about my trip. It was lovely. Did I miss anything, Steve?
Not really, but we had a good time where we were gone. Not gonna front. We had a couple really good episodes that I enjoyed. They seemed to be go over really well. So
one was really
what if I told you that? What if I told you that on this trip I disproved flat Earth?
I would say that probably you did because the Earth isn't flat. But I would like to see your evidence.
Well, I will show you. Let's, Dave. Can we please pull up the evidence? Now, this is me on the plane right over top of Ohio, right? And I'm looking out, and it's really clear, and I see something. I see something that these bastards are always complaining about not being able to see. And so I'm really proud of myself, guys, for what I did here. I did some detective work here. So let's take you on a flat Earth debunking journey, right? Red's rhetoric would be very proud of me right now. Okay, this is for you, Reds. All right, so if you look out into the distance, you can very faintly see something that all of the flat earthers think is the Holy Grail. Okay, now I even enhanced it for you, Dave, and I traced what you're seeing out there, right? Now, if you can't really tell there, I went a step further, Dave, and I took the Earth out. So all you're left is a line. This is the outside of what I'm seeing out my window. Now, even if that's not enough, I put a line on this thing, and I also added protractors. Are you getting a call, Steve?
That's me, actually. It's this. I think it's our guest for tonight. Did you tell him to catch me on Skype?
I don't know, but mute that side so that we can't hear that out there. Yeah. Okay. So if you're looking at this protractor, the one on the bottom is a straight line, goes straight through 180. But Steve, if you look at the one on the top, which is the outline of what I was seeing outside of my plane window, do you see how the edges just tuck past?
Yeah, there's clearly a degree of divergence from center midline.
So,
do you even math?
There you
bro?
go.
He mathed. He mathed, Reds. He mathed.
I didn't.
Our little boys all grown up.
No.
Come such a long way.
No. I didn't math. I traced, and then I laid down protractors.
Well, that's
I did not math.
I mean, geometry's math, dude. It's math.
But
it's all math.
But listen, I am probably the most mathematically challenged person on the planet, right? Flat earthers. If you really want to see curvature, you can see curvature. I saw it right outside of my plane window, and I thought enough to go, well, I'm going to take a picture of this, and then I'm going to get home and I'm going to see if by doing something simple like this, you can see curvature, and you can see curvature.
Because they designed the windows that way. The windows are designed to fool you.
Oh, yeah. You know what? That's exactly what they would say too.
Okay. That's exactly what they would say.
Confight. By the way, guys, we're just waiting on Confight to come in here. He was a little late for traffic. I think you guys know that in the live chat. Elijah's here, so we're just as soon as he gets in here, we'll begin. But until he gets in, I believe Steve has something that he wants to talk about that he's been the center of attention of these past couple days.
Before we do, real quick, the counter to that though, for what's called barrel distortion, the horizontal lines would would have all distortion on the edges. So a barrel distortion would actually warp all the horizontal lines except the one in dead center. So you would see it if you had a fisheye lens type situation. So that's definitely not the window. Anyway, so people might have checked out the conversation we had the other night and found out that Dr. Richard Carrier decided to do a blog on me. So I'm up there with like Bert Urban now and S.J. Thomason and Tim O'Neill, I guess. No, not quite. But there's a lot of things he got wrong about my positions. Carrier's a friend. I actually like Carrier. I was supposed to go have drinks with him. I thought it was this Sunday on the 27th. Brittany, Simon, and I had planned to take a trip down there on Sunday, but I found out I was actually on the 24th. I don't know how I screwed up my days, so we didn't go down there. But this is not something to go against like Richard as far as a personal thing. I actually like Richard, but if you read his blog, he definitely assigns certain things to me that I don't believe. Everybody who's ever listened to my arguments, I said the same thing, saying, "Hey, Steve, you really got your positions wrong." So it's not just my subjective opinion that he got my positions wrong. It is everybody who's ever listened to me has said that he got my positions wrong. He makes an argument that I think is a good argument for the justification for atheism, but then he extends it to saying that atheism has already met its burden of proof. Good game, theist. You can go home now until you got something to show us, and kind of burden shifts. Some things that some of the experts I've talked to said he's actually when Blunt blog. By the way, his blogs are like 7 of my blogs. I don't know if you guys read my blogs, but I'm on www.greatdebatecommunity.com, and my blogs are about that big. My longest is like a page.
I just want to show you real quick, Steve. If you look at this graph that I also prepared, we are running out of people like on our side. You went through Matt Dillahunty, Aaron Raw. Now I can mark off Richard Carter. The only person that we have left is G-Man.
Oh,
damn. That's right. Well, you got to go where you got to go.
Can you please just admit you're an atheist already, so that we can be friends with everybody again?
You know what? When I have more people admit that they're agnostic rather than atheist. But here's the thing. So I believe Rich Carey actually has a good argument using his Bayesian analysis approach as far as Bayesian epistemology. His argument is good as far as if you're using it for justification for why you hold a particular position. Hey, why are you an atheist? Well, because the Bayesian analysis, is kind of determined that it's less likely that there are gods. It's a very low probability. I've used the same argument. He's literally just taking an argument that I've used and other people have used and just made it Bayesian. Not a big deal. Low priors has always been an argument that I've used to support why people can be an atheist. But then he uses that to say, well, atheism has already met its burden of proof, like puts it on the same epistemic elevation as a scientific theory or a scientific consensus, or in this case, a theological consensus, and burden shifts to the theist. So in one blog, he's committed burden shifting, cherry picking, misappropriation of Bayesian analysis, begging the question, and I think special pleading. So there's a lot of fallacies I see in his blog, but if you want to go check it out, I can put the blog in the video description and kind of let me know what you guys think of it. Again, I'm not trying to do dog on Richard because he is a friend, but everything I've seen so far from the feedback I've been getting by people that are much more in the know than I am, especially even experts in Bayesian, have just crapped all over this blog post that he has. So I'm putting it in the live chat right now. I don't know why it's such a long URL, but do we have just real quick? Do we have all of our participants in? Okay, all right. So let me get through. Hold on, guys. Let me get through 2 more announcements, and then we will start tonight. Number 1, on Tuesday, Bill Ludlow and Aaron Ra will be with us, and 2 surprise guests. So make sure that you're with us for that. That's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to do something different with those 2 guys. So make sure that you are you're here for that. If you remember our CGI guy that we had come, Mr. Walker, he did the movies Fury and The Great Wall. He'll be back with us tomorrow for Saturday Night Fights. He will be going in a CGI debate on what is CGI and what isn't with Wonton. So if you've missed Wonton, tomorrow night is your night. He'll be back with us at 9. If you are one of our lovely patrons or one of the sponsors for the Adobe Cloud project that we had going on, Monday I will be emailing you guys the dates for the 2 private shows that are coming up at the beginning of February. Trevor Valley has already confirmed for one of those. So one of the hangouts in the shows will be we'll get to hang out with him. I'm finding somebody for him to debate. So not only will you get to see him debate somebody, but you'll also, and I think Brian actually has got a good candidate for that, because he can disprove dinosaurs, I hear. So if you want to see Trevor Valley go up against a dino denier just for you, then that is going to be for our patrons and the sponsors for the show. And we do appreciate you guys. There'll also be a private hangout tomorrow at 4.
So make sure that you are, if you're a patron, so make sure that you keep that in mind to make up for me missing last week. Let's see. Okay, last thing. Moodish is a debate website that is brand new. They just launched. It's a brand new concept. I reached out to them because I had an idea of something that I thought would be really cool, and surprisingly, they went along with it. And so I know that you guys like to have a conversation that carries on and continues from this show. What Moodish is, and on the right side of your screen, you'll see a card for them. It'll give you the information, but you can go to their website. They are a one-on-one debate platform. So you'll have two people that will sign up for a topic, and they'll enter into the chat, and they will start a debate. Now, people can spectate and watch, and as they're putting in their arguments, you can like or dislike based on what they're saying, and it's a really cool app. Well, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be partnering with them, and a lot of the topics that we have here on this show, starting Monday, actually, you'll be able to go from here over to that platform and carry on with the debate. And what we're going to do is each month we're going to take the top 3 debates, and the way that works is the debates that are the most upvoted will be we'll take the top 3, and they'll actually come from the website onto the show and have that debate that started on the website there. But it's a really cool debate app and website if you're looking to have a conversation. I'm just going to read this because I want to make sure that I get what they're going for right. And he sent me a little blurb to read out. Moodish is a debating platform to debate 1v1 on a topic with someone who has a different opinion to you. Matching people with different opinions together to have a good old-fashioned debate. Users are matched together and have a text chat room-style debate which others can spectate. Spectators can interact with the debate by agreeing or disagreeing with the statements made by the debate as the debate progresses. You can head over to moodish.com, that's mootish.com, to start your debate now, but not now, after this debate. But make sure you check that out. That's going to be a really cool collaboration that we're going to be doing, and there's all kind of stuff that we can do with that. There's actually Moodish on your screen right now. Okay, so let's dive into tonight's debate. By the way, we do have participation trophies for both of you tonight, just for participating. So
that's Jay's idea.
Here's the way tonight's going to work. It's going to be a little bit different than what we usually do. We usually have like free-forming discussions. Tonight's going to be timed rounds. Gentlemen, the clock is up top of your screen right beside NonSequitur. Just keep an eye on that. We will play a sound when your time runs out, but just so that I don't have to break in to throw you off of your train of thought, just keep an eye on the clock up there. The first rounds will be 10 minutes. That will be the introduction rounds to state their positions on the proposition, and then subsequent rounds will be 5 minutes after that. And the proposition tonight is: should the United States maintain a major military, economic, and political presence in the Middle East, or ought it scale down its involvement in and leave regional affairs to Middle Eastern countries? So I'm going to let you guys take a few seconds to introduce yourselves. Actually, if you want to, stay how you got here, like how you guys kind of linked up, that'll be cool too. But just go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us how we got here.
So yeah, I'm Confight. I have a YouTube channel I do random stuff on. I've been planning on doing a couple more things. I'm working on a couple of videos now, so those will be out soon. But so we met on, so the way me and Elijah met, we met on Reddit where we got into an argument, and I decided, hey, why not take it here? So we decided to go here. We talked about the Iraq War mostly. So that's kind of where this all began, and yeah. So I'm ready for this. You want to go, Elijah?
Sure. My name's Elijah, and that is pretty much how we met. I was mostly just I mean, we was mostly just browsing, because I was curious to see what general opinions were in a particular subreddit that I'd not encountered before. And generally speaking, I have contentious opinions on the region, so that means I tend to attract a fair amount of dissent. So I guess I don't really have much of an online presence outside of that. I mostly just keep to myself into some close circles. That's not really much to introduce, so we can get started whenever.
All right.
Awesome. Well, welcome both of you. Do you have a preference on which one of you wants to go first?
I'm down for whatever. I'm down to clown.
Okay. Well, we will let you clown then. You may begin clowning as soon as the clock starts.
Alrighty.
Boom.
Okay. Ever since the Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916, the United States has been actively interfering with the internal politics of the peoples of the Middle East. A major reason why there is so much conflict in that region is because of the meddling of the U.S. The rhetoric of democracy and freedom have masked a policy of imperialism and tyranny. The Iraq War is only the most recent debacle. The conflict left Iraq in a much worse state than it was before, and that's saying a lot of things considering it used to be under a brutal dictatorship. Its infrastructure was destroyed, its military advisors left, and its politics was thrown into chaos. Just because it is now a democracy doesn't mean things have gotten better. With the recent hawkish saber-rattling towards Syria and Venezuela, I think it's time to remind ourselves what previous U.S. interventions have done. I'll begin with a quote from a book about the inner workings of the interim government of Iraq by Rajiv. I forget how to say his last name. Chandranaskikaran. I apologize. I butchered that. Called Imperial Life in the Emerald City. Quote, in a land of honor and tradition, the viceroy had disrespected the old soldiers. I never ran into the angered soldier again, but months later, I did see another former soldier who had been at the protest. What happened to everyone there, I asked. Did they join the new army? He laughed. They're all insurgents now, he said. This quote really gets to the crux of the issue. The disrespect of sovereignty and infantilization of the peoples of the Middle East has been pervasive in U.S. policy. Of course, when people get trampled on, they turn to radical solutions, hence the prevalence of Islamic extremists. Had the United States not invaded Iraq, ISIS would have never come about. The military experience of the Ba'athist Party members was influential and key to their success. This speaks nothing of America arming insurgents since the days of the Mujahideen, thereby bringing power to all radical groups. The direct actions of the Pentagon have shattered the fragile region and paved the way for Jesus, I'm bad with words today. Syrian, Libyan, and Iraqi civil wars of the 2010s. If we truly believe we must help the people of the region, why not use humanitarian aid instead of military conquest? We caused this quagmire. It's time we finally learn our lesson and leave. The U.S., we need to focus on ourselves, not on our infrastructure, on the opioid crisis, on income inequality, on healthcare, rather than spending tax dollars on bombing farmers in the far-off desert. This discourse of democracy in the Middle East is bunk. America has overthrown democracies in the region when it is politically expedient. Mohammad Mossadegh was overthrown by the CIA in 1953 because he was attempting to nationalize Iran's oil. That coup would have profound effects on U.S.-Iran relations, ultimately being a major reason for the cutoff of diplomatic ties. The short-sightedness of American policy has led to disaster over and over again. Arming insurgents against the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan led to the rise of Osama bin Laden. Backing the Shah would lead to the Islamic Revolution of 1979. Dealing arms to out of Libya led to the attack of the U.S. Embassy in Benghazi in 2012. The list goes on. Unintended consequences have destroyed the region, and ironically, in trying to keep our power in the Middle East, America has, in fact, weakened its position substantially. If democracy and human rights are our goals in the Middle East, our allies most certainly don't represent these values. Saudi Arabia is a Wahhabi state currently committing egregious human rights violations, both internally and outside their borders. Should we support a nation that beheads atheists if we are supposedly the world policeman? What about a nation that starves a country in a brutal, quasi-genocidal war? The powers that be seem to say yes. In fact, arms sales have increased the fuel for the Yemeni civil war. This is not to mention Israel's crimes, even though they have a democracy. In any case, we should be moving away from oil towards renewable resources. So maintaining our presence in the Middle East for economic reasons isn't that great of an investment. There's no reason for us to be there. Let's get out. All right. I cede the rest of my time to the moderators.
Well, I will take your time and I will sling it over in Elijah's direction.
All right.
All right, I'm ready to go.
All right, sir. Whenever you begin the time, we'll start.
All right, then. Afghanistan under the Taliban was both a harbor of terrorism and a massively unpopular and unwelcome despotate to much of the public. In the years immediately following the overthrow of the Taliban, the U.S. began an extensive project to rebuild Afghan infrastructure. The purpose of this twofold. Improving economic activity both improves the livelihood of the Afghan people, and it increases the legitimacy of the government, and grants them more tax revenue to enforce their governorship. However, in later years, as interest in the region began to dwindle and resources began to dry up, the Marine deployment there has found it harder to repel Taliban attacks on this very infrastructure. This infrastructure, which now in increasing disrepair, is causing more downturns in the domestic economy, to the point where the government simply is losing ability to administrate some towns and regions, which allows the Taliban to become de facto government. If this continues, the entire country could collapse again. But it is fixable by reaffirming both military and financial dedication to the area, massive spending to revitalize the infrastructure again, to ensure the Taliban stays dead, and to help Afghanistan develop its own state military and eventually become independent of American support. This is the great challenge of the U.S.'s role in the entire region. It is an interesting microcosm. Without our full commitment to combating extractive autocrats and protecting what strongholds of prosperity remain, the entire region will likely continue to suffer a cycle of extremism and poverty. Even with minor financial sacrifices, we can make measurable progress to breaking this cycle. However, we cannot truly ensure a future for prosperity and democracy in the region without major commitments. Afghanistan's an interesting example I brought up because it has a lot of most studied and most measured results. The Ring Road is, of course, the single most famous fact of our infrastructure in the region because it connects the largest cities in Afghanistan, which allows a lot of commerce to take place. Interestingly, the government of Afghanistan has notably been, The government of Afghanistan was unpopular when it was basically directly the Taliban. And the Taliban itself is often cited as having originated from U.S. support to the Mujahideen. However, something that's important to note is that the original founders of separatist groups that eventually became forces like the Taliban were explicitly in dissent to the direction that groups like the Mujahideen were going. They were explicitly separatists from the people we had funded. They had managed to take resources with them, but they were explicitly separatists. That does not necessarily excuse poorly thought out policy. And indeed, situations like the one in Iran can be the natural consequence of poorly thought out policy. It is worth noting, however, that placing sole direct blame on Central Intelligence Agency action in the area is overestimating their abilities. It's pretty much impossible for the CIA to affect any change that is not on some level wanted by some amount of the public. This is because the CIA simply cannot manufacture new dissent. They cannot manufacture new political arguments. They cannot manufacture new divides in a country. They can merely exploit growing instability, growing bubbling issues, tilting them in their favor. That still does not excuse the destruction of democratic societies to replace them with convenient autocrats. And I believe there are many flaws in our policy, not the least of which being our willing association with groups like the House of Saud. However, many of these were originally born as alliances out of necessity. you'll notice that we had significant withdrawal of our military presence in Saudi Arabia after the Iraq War was over. This is because Saudi Arabia's use to us was primarily as a force for basing and as a force for suppressing Iranian expansion. It is undeniable that Iran is a funder of terrorism to expand their personal state ideology. And their personal state ideology is one that is largely antithetical to the development of potentially secular and human rights respecting democracies. However, Saudi Arabia has time and time again demonstrated they are not a dependable force for doing so. Initial movements towards constitutionalism that we thought were going to continue have since slowed and even ceased, and the threat of their repeal is growing more prevalent, especially as Saudi leaders seem more interested in associating with an autocratic power such as Russia. It's clear that abandoning Saudi Arabia will be an eventual policy change, simply because they are not serving our purposes in the region, and they themselves are a perpetrator of many crimes in the region. But they do represent, but the fact that we allied with them to begin with represents one of the biggest problems that we have, and that is our power is not, it often needs a vector to establish bases in. It needs a vector to establish diplomatic and economic pull-through. But fortunately, we can develop alternatives to that. Iraq's present state of government is absolutely non-functional. However, groups, for example, the Economist Intelligence Unit ranks Iraq's democracy's internal mechanics, such as its electoral process, its civil liberties, and other such structures of its government, as generally speaking indicative of a healthy democracy. Therefore, wouldn't supporting a stronger central Iraqi government lead eventually to the establishment of a strong democratic entity in the region, one that we could more depend on? Now, that is important. That is important because it suggests that it shows directly that the region is to some extent malleable. If we go about it strategically, if we go about it carefully. Now, Iraq specific instabilities are largely caused by the government not having enough money to afford policing, to afford a strong enough military. However, reports of a civil war in Iraq are frankly vastly overstated. The structure of Iraq's government is largely federal, meaning that the different ethnic groups that make up Iraq as a result of the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which deliberately amalgamated different religious groups together, cultural groups together. These groups largely have separate autonomous regions of self-governance, so they're able to enforce their own personal cultural values to some extent. This, combined with a generally representative parliament, means that Iraqis, largely speaking, believe in the value of preserving their government and preserving their existing parliament. So there's been largely more unity in fighting forces like ISIS that have developed in the region. ISIS, by the way, is an excellent example of Saudi Arabia going against our initial goals, or even straight up threatening the institution of democracy itself. ISIS was originally funded through Saudi support, and their presence would largely continue to have grown even without a U.S. intervention, simply because the Arab Spring was the true window for their growth. The Arab Spring is what enabled their growth into Syria. It is why they are the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, and not just the Islamic State in Iraq. The Arab Spring would have happened with or without our presence. It represents a strong desire among the various people of the Middle East and North Africa to have more democratic government. This suggests that we have people in the area we can be working with. We don't necessarily have to work through proxies and autocrats as with the House of Saud. We can work we can work to build support among groups that genuinely want democracy and genuinely approve and want to see a united and democratic Iraq, or a united and democratic Syria, or a united and democratic Iran, etc., etc. Notice my timer has gone away. Has my time run out?
Dave?
Nope.
I think so.
All right.
Okay.
Sorry for going over time. Thank you, though.
That's okay. In just a second, guys, I know some of you are trying to figure out who's talking at times. We're going to have a green little microphone icon beside the person that is actually talking here in just a second, so you'll be able to know who's saying what. All right, so we'll put 5 minutes on the clock here in just a second, and Confight, you will be able to respond to Elijah's opening statement.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
All right.
All right, whenever you're ready.
So there's a lot to go over in that. One of the biggest things I think you were talking about was we have to have a presence in the region. Why do we have to have a presence in the region in order to? Is it the U.S.? Should the U.S. have this goal of exporting democracy? I don't think that that's a good idea, just simply because that's what I was talking about with infantilization. These people in these regions can take care of themselves, and they don't like it when we come in. Even if we're trying to do it out of humanitarian aid, the enemies of us are going to use that to their advantage by basically saying the U.S. got involved and the U.S. is bad, therefore you should join us. And that's kind of what happened. And this is what happened with the drone war, where you have basically the U.S. targeting, having a very poor targeting of military compounds and instead accidentally killing civilians, which turns people against the U.S. and leads to jihadism. Basically what you have is, if someone kills your entire family, then why would I have to care about the U.S. and care about democracy when I have this other guy who's like, hey, I'm going to fight against the U.S.? It doesn't make any sense. Like, we don't, even if our goal is like humanitarian aid, why are we sending the military? We don't need the military in these places. Why not just have humanitarian aid? Why not just have like Doctors Against Border, or Doctors Without Borders? This is kind of what indicative of the U.S.'s policy before the Sykes-Picot Agreement, because you have a lot of American missionaries offering aid. For instance, American missionaries actually offered a lot of aid during the Armenian genocide and that sort of thing. And the U.S. was really a very positive power in the early 20th century, where you have the King Crane Commission, for instance, which was a commission that took the popular vote of all the people in the region in order to see how the former Ottoman lands would be divided up. And the U.S. didn't go with that because we were told by Britain we shouldn't go with that. So we chose the mandate system, and that really fucked over everyone. So, not to mention this idea of, well, Iraq has good electoral processes, but its infrastructure is still bad. We bombed most of that infrastructure. That's our fault directly. It's not that they had decent infrastructure before we came there, but the way the U.S. conducts war is on a very... We like to do wars of annihilation, where we go in, you take out the centers of production, you take out the means of production, and then you basically roll in and crush whatever is left, which works very well against an actual force, like, for instance, Saddam Hussein's Iraq, but very, very, very poorly against an insurgency, because insurgencies hide amongst the people. And essentially, in order to do a war of annihilation against an insurgency, you have to do a war of annihilation against an entire people, which just doesn't work. It doesn't end well. So, not even mentioning, why should we have these strange bedfellows if our goal is democracy? Why do we need to make alliances with all these, jihadists and, Saudi Arabia? Like I said before, you were talking about we were pulling out of Saudi Arabia, and I agree with that. But we still are funding them. We still are giving them weapons. Raytheon is giving them all. It's the military-industrial complex. We're selling them weapons. They're doing war, and we like it because we get shit tons of money. It's what's been going on since the 50s. It's what's been going on since pretty much, since the 50s. Not to mention, what if you don't know that the Arab Spring would have happened without the Iraq War? We don't know that the Iraq War put such a wrench in everything that it's there's too many variables to try to say, oh, yes, it caused it, or no, it did not cause it. So, not even that. What if we had a democracy that didn't like the U.S.? You have to realize Iran came about through a popular revolution, and they're also a republic in many ways, like the U.S. So, if the state does not want to be secular, then should we oppose it? Or should we just say they're a democracy, so therefore they are automatically in line with the U.S.? Or should we just have all these people in the region just do whatever? It just doesn't add up. It doesn't make any sense. Like, our policy we need to focus on ourselves right now. We have so many things that we are in crisis, that we have so many crises in the U.S., it's impossible to really say we should put tax dollars towards funding other Middle Eastern adventures.
Okay. All right. Elijah, will pop 5 minutes up for you. And as soon as it's up there, you can start. All right. Whenever you're ready.
All right. Thank you. So I think a simple reoccurring theme that I'd like to, well, not a reoccurring thing, a simple theme that I'd like to make clear is that with any amount of power comes inherently a responsibility to use that power to the best of your ability to help people who could benefit from your power. This is not, this isn't particularly an example of attempting to paternalize a group of people who do not want our who do not want our presence or who are fine running themselves. In many cases, a lot of these states have been subject to the capture of state institutions by aggressively theocratic and aggressively autocratic bodies who plain and simply are not interested in the well-being of the public. It's not just a matter of, I mentioned, of course, exporting democracy, but that's not the only aspect to it. Prosperity comes primarily from something called inclusive institutions, which is very well described by the book Why Nations Fail, if anyone's interested in more reading. But essentially, the idea is that a domestic economy should be structured in a certain way that that essential components of production, labor, capital, are flowing in a way that allow people to independently benefit from them without excessive amounts of production going directly to an autocratic body such as a state. A textbook example of an extractive institution is, of course, the infamous institution of colonialism. It was a process by which labor and capital were directly extracted from the people who were, producing goods and delivered to, say, the British Crown or some other force or some other greater power that was choosing to directly benefit from the wealth created. It's not the reason why this matters is because many states in the region lack that kind of structure. That blocks them from having a lot of prosperity. They need a major overhaul in who is in charge there. They need a major overhaul in who is allowed to do business there. They need a major change in how the economy functions in a lot of these cases. Now, the Arab Spring started in Tunisia, not in the Fertile Crescent. The Arab Spring started in Tunisia, which is in North Africa, purely out of a domestic desire for democracy. And analysts will give you all kinds of reasons why it spread, fundamentally, though, being that, examples of people successfully overthrowing an autocratic government inspires more people to rebel against autocratic forms of government. But Tunisia is the success story of the Arab Spring. Many states, such as Egypt, suffered or dealt with these revolts, but they did not succeed because the governments were able to adequately repress them, were able to successfully, subdue them. Yes, we should have a presence that's built around groups that exist in the region, because there are groups that exist in the region that want democracy, that want freer economic institutions. There are groups there that want, our goals. And if we don't help them, they won't be able to successfully implement them. Iran is an interesting example because while in fact a republic, there's a huge amount of power concentrated in a theocratic clergy that is bent on exporting the Iranian revolution to the rest of the region. They effectively want to build a sphere of influence out of the Middle East. There's which interestingly is kind of not what the U.S. is often accused of using the region for profit, but of course, as you mentioned, it is a very expensive endeavor. It is worth every penny because if we don't do it, nobody will. But it's not particularly an endeavor that that we profit off of as though it were a colonial endeavor. My time is up. Thank you.
All right, and we will go back to Gunfight.
All right. Okay, so you talk about responsibility, the old quote, with great power comes great responsibility, but you also must realize that we also have the responsibility to not use that power for our own gain. You talk about colonialism and say, oh, well, it's different from the U.S. You have to realize, so after the 53 coup that overthrew Mossadegh, the Shah that we put in power sold cheap oil to basically everyone. How is that different from colonialism? It's basically it's soft imperialism is really what it is. It's economic imperialism. We're not going in there and wrenching it out and enslaving everyone and working their land. What we're doing is we're saying basically, if you don't follow what we want you to do, we will try to topple your government. And there's also the sphere of influence thing. How is Iran building a sphere of influence different from the U.S.? I understand. I know what you're talking about with the revolution. You're very correct. The 79 revolution started out fairly secular and started out with a lot of college kids and turned into when Khomeini came to power because of his charisma, turned into more of a theocratic government. And I do believe that, but here's the thing though, Iran is changing very, very rapidly. There's a very young populace that enjoys more Western ideas and Western thought. They sooner or later, I'm going to say sooner, the people will start to reform that country, and I don't think it's going to stay an Islamic republic for long. I think it's just going to become a republic. But that being said, if that republic does not want to do the needs of the U.S., should we go in and topple them? I think the U.S. wants to do that because that's the whole thing. It's if we want to do good by the people in the region, why not just send humanitarian aid? Why not just send, other people? You talk about, say, instead of sending humanitarian aid, we should send military aid because if no one else supports these people, then who will? People can win revolutions very, very easily without support. So, for the most part, I mean, the Iranian Revolution did a lot of that. Iran had a very prominent military, but the thing is, you have to basically to win a revolution, you got to take over parts of the military for whatever reason. And I don't think that the U.S. needs to get involved in all of these cases because it just adds outside influence that really taints the power, even if we're doing it for purely good and kind of just reasons. There's still that taint of power that can ultimately crumble the government that we built up. And what about, what if a government didn't want a capitalist economy? What if they wanted socialism? Should we support that? Should we say, hey, the government's okay? Like what's going on in Venezuela right now? A lot of the problems that Venezuela is having is mostly, I know this is not in the Middle East, but it's a good analog because the United States policy in the Middle East and Latin America is really quite similar. So you have basically this government that, I don't like Maduro. Maduro's not doing a lot of good stuff, and he's doing a lot of whatever. But my issue with that is that the U.S. likes to play down our role that we have in that crisis because we were putting sanctions on them, doing all kinds of things, and like when they tried to get, there was an article the other day that I saw where it was they tried to buy food from Turkey. Venezuela tried to buy food from Turkey, but the British bank just held all their gold, so the people didn't get food. And how are we going to say that we're a global force for good and we're supporting, if we're supporting this, if we just don't let people do what they want? Because you have to realize Chavez was popularly elected. Should we overthrow the government just because Trump was elected and we don't like Trump? Does that make any sense? It's very weird because you also have the idea of, well, Venezuela, the argument is that it's not a legit election, but the 2016 election in the U.S. was arguably also very not legit. I'm not even talking about Russia. I'm mostly just talking about the Electoral College and how that does, how you can win the popular vote but not win the whole entire big pie. So I'm just saying that the U.S. does a lot of stuff other countries do that we condemn for, but we like to turn a blind eye to them because it's not about democracy. It's not about humanitarian aid. It's about money.
Okay. And we will do let's do 2 more rounds of the 5, and then we'll let you guys kind of have a conversation back and forth where you can ask each other questions and see if you can get to each other's point of view better. Sound good?
Yep, that sounds good.
Okay. All right. Whenever you're ready.
All right. So I'd like to start with the oil imports and the idea that we're strong arming these kinds of nations into effectively forcing them to export oil to American buyers. This is pretty much just a falsehood. You could argue that the British have done this, in particular in the case with Iran, but it's actually pretty much just a falsehood. The United States is not dependent on oil imports, least of all from the Middle East. We mostly import from Canada. We have not been strong arming Canada into forcing us into forcing Canada into selling us oil, but there is it is possible that you might be assuming that purchases of oil, oil being acquired by companies registered or associated with American companies from those regions. It's important to note that foreign investment is, generally speaking, an important part of any development in a nation that needs new developments, and so naturally, foreign companies will be likely to profit somewhat, but that is secondary. That is a secondary effect. They are, frankly, what is important is that capital is flowing into the country, that development is flowing into the country, and this differs greatly from aid. Because aid can often be captured by state bodies. Aid sent to Iran can often be sucked up by the Iranian government because of just how huge of a presence that the groups like that the Iranian government has. Iran's democratization is an interesting proposition, and I think should be monitored closely. But we shouldn't take it as an absolute given that they're going to change anytime soon, particularly as they continue to export Shia terrorism. Another thing I would mention is, the idea that revolutions can be won alone is not generally speaking, true. The Iranian Revolution, for example, was supported by none other than the Soviet Union and former Soviet bodies that seek to establish and protect and Iran is to this day supported by Russia, who seeks to establish a sense of legitimacy for autocratic rule, because Russia does not want democratic rule to threaten their own autocratic rule. The American Revolution was supported by France. That's the obvious one. But the Tunisian Revolution had external support, even if it was just monetary. Going out of the region a little, the Liberian, the Second Liberian Civil War was supported by Ghana and Great Britain, and that resulted in creating a democracy. By the way. There is a need for support to get these revolutions won. It is very, 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 very rare for revolution to truly be won alone, simply because of how much power disparity exists between a state and the people it governs in the modern age. Something I would point out is, should we be standing by for the invasion of Kuwait, for example? That is a direct act of aggression by an autocratic ruler, Saddam Hussein, a genocidal ruler, by the way, who was, murdering the Kurds in his country until for quite a while, and whose successor had his own aspirations. Should we be standing by in those kinds of events? That's not particularly that's not particularly that's not particularly conductive to a good future of those countries if we allow them to just duke it out themselves and don't stand up for people who need to be stood up. The next thing I'd mention is going to your talk on Venezuela, and I'll be really quick about this. Hugo Chavez weakened democratic institutions, as did Maduro. I would not suggest contesting the election of Hugo Chavez, but I do think that people who attempt to and who proceed to weaken democratic institutions, who proceed to attack the strength of Congresses and elections and constitutional courts, are a danger to democracy itself. Our sanctions on Venezuela do not have measurable effect on its economy. We sanction people and leaders, not the entire nations. The American elections, its democracy score is still very high compared to Venezuela's, because we still have genuinely democratic institutions to protect us from things like that particular election.
Okay.
My time is up. Thank you.
Yeah, well, that's all. All right, so we got. We'll do one more 5-minute round for Khan to respond to you, and then we'll let Elijah let you start the next round by asking him a question, or you can respond to what he says here, and then you guys can just have kind of a free flowing back and forth. Okay, conflict.
Okay then.
So one of the things you talked about was Iraq was genocidal. You have to realize the U.S. did not talk about their gassing of the Kurds until well after the war was over. It was only when Saddam stepped out of line in 91 that they did that. And Kuwait's a very interesting thing, because so the reason why Iraq invaded Kuwait, the U.S. position was always that they just wanted money from the war that made them broke, and in a way that's true. But there's also the idea that Kuwait was doing what is called, They were drilling into Iraqi oil reserves, and we know that happened. And Kuwait used to be a part of Iraq, so when they were first invaded, a lot of the Arab countries in the region didn't think much of it, just because it was, they're reabsorbing Kuwait back into Iraq because it's basically their own province and they owed the money anyways. And Kuwait was also selling oil really, really cheap. So it's an interesting thing, but when you said the U.S. needs to step up and defend these countries, I would say the UN really needs to step up, honestly. The United Nations should be doing things like that and policing the world. We should have the UN be a governing council for human rights. Unfortunately, they're not, because there's politics involved, but I don't think that the U.S. then should go around and do vigilante justice and say, oh, well, we know what's best for these countries, because the U.S. has a lot of people in it who are looking to make lots of money. So And not even to mention, going back to the Iran-Iraq War, let's see, I have a statement on, this is from '87, where Reagan was talking about the Iraqi forces, and he makes a very, let's see, we cannot but condemn Iranian seizure and occupation of Iraqi territory, and we call again upon the government of Iran to join the government of Iraq in seeking a rapid negotiated solution. Let's see. I was trying to find. I found this earlier. I apologize. All right, disregard that. What I was trying to say was that in this statement, it was more focused on Iran and going into all the kinds of things that Iran was doing, when it was in fact the war in and of itself was a offensive war by Iraq. And you were right, it was a genocidal war, and Saddam was a genocidal maniac. But look, when we took him down and refused to keep anyone who with a semblance of power in power, or keep anyone in check, they ended up joining ISIS. One of the biggest things about ISIS is that they fight. If they did not have the Ba'athist Party members in ISIS, it wouldn't have worked, because essentially ISIS fights in a very specific way. They fight like an insurgency sometimes, and then so basically when they're advancing, they fight like a usual army, and they do lightning war and do very, very fast attacks and do very, very hit hard, hit fast, keep going, keep steamrolling, and catch people off guard. But the second that they start getting on the back foot, they turn into an insurgency where they dig in their heels, dig into everything else, and rely more on infantry rather than armored vehicles like in their previous exploits. So they have this really, one of the Ba'athist Party members created that style of warfare specifically to combat the U.S. and more traditional styles of warfare that we like to do, like I said, like wars of annihilation. So I don't think that even if the Arab Spring had happened, it most certainly wouldn't have plunged Iraq into almost a civil war as they did, because you have to realize there was also Shia revolutions in the south, and the Kurds were fighting with the Iraqi government. The Iraqi government does not want to represent the Kurds, or even have a lot of Kurd. I want to watch myself here, because you are correct in saying that there is that the Kurds are represented partially democratically, but a lot of Kurds want to create their own state, and the Iraqi government is not even considering measures to do that. So there is that. Awesome.
Okay. All right. We're gonna let you guys have a conversation. Dave, if you'll put 15 minutes on the clock, and the only thing that we ask is that neither one of you just overtalk each other, because the people who are listening can't hear anything. It just sounds like a garbled mess. So we will step in if that's the case, and I don't want to have to, but we will mute if it gets to that point. But just be respectful of each other's points, and let each other finish their thoughts, and then you can go. But Elijah, we're going to start back with you, whether you want to ask a question or make a statement, completely up to you, but you can start now.
All right, thank you. And in the spirit of coming to some level of agreement, I absolutely agree with you that the United Nations should be taking a grander role in these things. The United Nations represents not just the United States, but international coalitions. And I'm really, and I think there are a few things that limit the United Nations' ability to do so. But I absolutely agree that in the future, the United Nations should be taking a much stronger presence, as they did. They did, endorse. They did support. They have supported some actions in the region in the past, and outside of the region, most famously, it was a United Nations force. It was legally a United Nations force that was coming to the aid of South Korea in the Korean War. So yes, I do agree with you. The United Nations should be taking a grander step. Can I still ask a question? Or
sure.
Are we going back? right.
So it's open, whatever we want to do.
All right, cool. So my question, I guess, is I get the idea that that ISIS has a strong presence of Ba'athists in its insurgency, but what I think is what I want to excuse me. What I want to know is what I guess what do you see what do you see happening to an uninvaded Iraq? What do you see happening with a Ba'athist dictatorship continuing to govern, and insurgencies still insurgencies still being funded by Saudi Arabia hypothetically, or what do you think is the following course of action? Do you think the Arab Spring still hits the region? What do you think Iraq looks like today?
I think that I think you were correct in saying that the Arab region or the Arab Spring would happen. It's hard to tell because again, there's a lot of variables involved, and no doubt, I think that Saddam would have been most likely, still in power. He probably would have. I'm just trying to think this out because it's an interesting question, and it's hard to answer because we have a lot of variables, like I said, that we haven't. We just can't account for because that's the nature of history. Unfortunately, we can't say these what if questions are asked a lot, and it's hard to go back and say, well, what if this, what if that. But I think what would have happened is more than likely they would have probably just put down the revolution, and people like ISIS would have not had power at all because they weren't being funded by anyone. We also have to bear in mind the U.S. was selling weapons to ISIS out of Libya. That was the whole thing about Benghazi, was that they were selling weapons out of that. It was all a front for a weapons operation to sell weapons to the quote unquote moderate rebels in Syria. I think Iraq probably would have just put it down. Or I don't know. The real answer is I think Iraq would have stood a much better wouldn't have splintered like we saw it did if it had stayed around. That being said, I'm not trying to defend Saddam. There's a huge difference. What I'm trying to say is that I think probably the course of action would have been to let the country have a revolution in and of itself and stay out of their politics, that rather than going in there and trying to intervene.
I do have some important, I guess, sort of fact checks, basically. The slant drilling accusations of Kuwait were patently false. They were the regional equivalent of the Marco Polo Bridge incident, something pretty much fabricated to justify aggression. Furthermore, the United States did not directly sell weapons to ISIS. The closest you could argue is that by supporting a regime that did consequently support ISIS, the U.S. did indirectly support it. But even that is as it's possible that Saudi Arabia could continue the funding without U.S. aid.
I mean, part of me, you are correct in saying that we didn't quote unquote directly sell them, but we were selling them to basically moderate rebels. And once those weapons get into the Middle East, these rebels are more inclined to join ISIS. That's what I mean when they're selling it to ISIS. They're not doing it directly, but they're doing it to groups with easy access to ISIS. And the U.S. really was not careful to not try to arm these groups because they didn't really care. Syria was a hostile government, and so we wanted Assad gone. So we said what we did what we always do: arm people that don't necessarily agree with us, but that'll do our bidding. And I think that kind of hits the nail on the head. But going back to the slant drilling, I do agree with you that there is a lot of dubiousness there. It's hard to say who is right and who is wrong because there's been so much propaganda and there's been so much all these kinds of different groups doing different shitty things. Like you had the Kuwaiti ambassador's daughter testify to the UN about the incubators incident where they were throwing babies on the ground supposedly, but that actually didn't happen. And it was kind of a disaster in that sense. So that's where the question of is the slant drilling accusation true kind of comes up, where it's like, well, if we lied about this, why not lie about that? But again, I personally, I think it probably wasn't as big a deal as Iraq made it out to be, and they were trying to look for a justification. So I would agree with you partially there, but I just think that I don't know if the Gulf War was justified because the Gulf our ousting of them is entirely justified just because they were dishonest.
All right. I think that's that is technically true, but one of the there's a big I guess something that you've kind of something that you've mentioned is kind of it's kind of dangerous to say, and that's the idea of there being too much ambiguity to say for certain. And while I absolutely support being positively certain, for example, in many cases the evidence, for example, of WMDs in Iraq was very poorly founded. Just leaving things at it's too hard to tell it's too hard to tell who's right and who's wrong inherently benefits whoever is presently in power in any particular setting. Saying you're not sure who's right or who's wrong kind of implicitly benefits whoever's presently in power. And so in Syria, for example, that's Assad. And Assad, by the we have valid reason to say that some of these people are demonstrably worse. Bashar al-Assad has on multiple occasions used chemical weapons on civilians. We know that. The idea that it's been done repeatedly. So rather than the idea that it could have possibly been faked to justify an intervention is frankly absurd. Because it's happened so many times and none of them have prompted actual intervention. It's clear that he's doing it because he knows he can get away with it, and because it furthers his goals. And
I just wanted to say one thing about the gassing accusations. One of the things that makes me very questionable about that was that the reports on the ground were. I don't know if I would say it was fact. And again, I don't want to be caught here saying, oh man, I support Assad. I don't. I know you found me on a subreddit that jokes about that, but that's the joke. It's not, we don't actually, or at the very least, I don't actually support it. I'm just saying the reason why I circle jerk over there is just because it basically takes the normal position of the media's position of Assad is terrible and everything is bad. And it's like, well, what if we just all kind of said Assad was good and we just all talked about how great Assad was and we were just all Assad puppets? So that's the joke. It's the satire really of the media. But in going on that, the biggest thing was that people were saying, oh, first it's sarin and then it's, mustard gas and then it's all these other things. And the reports on the ground were very, very muddled. And the only agencies that really I didn't find a whole lot of good reputable sources about that. And I think you're very right in saying that sometimes there's this wishy-washy idea of, well, both sides is not really all that great and productive. But I do think it is, in order to establish a policy, we must figure out these facts to the best of our abilities. And I don't think that the Syrian gas attacks have really been. There was also some I don't know if this was a conspiracy theory. I heard rumors that there was the Turkish military was doing actions in the area at the time Assad gassed the area. So there was a lot of there was kind of a dubious nature about that, because obviously Turkey wants to get involved in Iran to take back former Ottoman territories, or not Iran, in Syria to take back former Ottoman territories. So you have that going on. So I understand your point, but I would say that some skepticism is needed.
All right. One thing I wanted to clarify, by the way, was motivation for the gas attacks is largely as a statement. It's a terror statement, which brings me to another fact that fact I wanted to point out as the idea of drone strikes leading to radicalization is there's actually not a consistently proven link in favor of that. And while while that may seem a really callous thing to say, after all, scientific proof of that kind of psychological link requires a whole lot of rigor. It's important to note that there's a very strong there's a very severe difference in what we see of drone usage versus what the general trend is. Typically, we give a lot of deference to any local authorities that have requested or are benefiting from our aid in deciding targets, and so they will typically and they will not always, they will sometimes use less discretion than is ideal. However, primary targets of these are camps. They're primarily used for air support. They're sometimes used for direct assassinations, but they are fairly accurate. They cause remarkably little collateral, especially compared to any other form of warfare.
I think.
So I would mention.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm finished actually. Yeah.
I just wanted to say one thing about the drone strikes. There was an infamous incident in Yemen where Saudi Arabia basically said, "Oh, this is a bunch of terrorists gathering in this street," but it was actually a funeral procession, and about I wanted to say I don't want to get the number wrong, but it was a fairly large amount of people, at least several dozen, were killed in that. And while you are correct in saying that they are accurate, you also have to realize you have the Gitmo problem of, well, if we just let whoever's in power say these are the targets that we want you to destroy, a lot of times they'll actually destroy, instead of terrorists and jihadists, it's just political dissidents who disagree with the government, and so they use it as a method of control as well. So I think you need to be careful when we're talking about drone warfare. Also, you have the issue of impersonality in warfare that is not personal is much more deadly. You see this in naval conflict a lot because you're much more likely to shoot at a big hunk of steel than look someone in the eyes and kill them. In the same sense that if you're looking at a screen and there's just a blip on it and you blow it up, there's not this idea of, am I doing the right thing? Or there is a lot less conscious thought put into it. And so you have a lot less time to think about if this person is actually a target or not.
Right. The clock is winding down, so in case I don't have any further time to say it, I do want to let this out, and that is, I do fundamentally understand the caution behind your belief. I understand not wanting to intervene. I understand fearing for the very real human cost of this sort of thing. But I also want to bring up one more thing, and that's the very real human cost of failure. And this is going to go outside of the region a little bit. Right now in Myanmar, there is at present an ethnic cleansing being conducted.
Yeah.
And in the past, we famously chose to, not famously, but under the Clinton administration, he chose to do he chose to minimize intervention in Rwanda during the Rwanda genocide. That one ended in disaster. It was allowed to progress. It was allowed to complete to the goals of the government. And I'm just really. You understand, I am far more motivated, or not far more motivated, but I am incredibly motivated by ensuring we learn our lesson from that and that we don't make that mistake again. Then as much as I understand the desire to learn from, say, Vietnam or Iraq, it is Rwanda that scares me more than either of those.
And I think there's a valid concern there. I would definitely agree, but I think we're doing this at the wrong people. Like you said before, we agree that the UN should do more. I definitely agree that the UN should do something about the Rohingya Muslim massacre going on in Myanmar. I definitely 100% agree. But the US at the current time, I don't think we should alone use our military in order to try to stop that. I think we can give as much humanitarian aid as humanly possible, like we did during the Armenian genocide, and try to do as much as we humanly can. But military intervention is just going to make things worse and exacerbate things. So I do agree that if we need to have the UN become more of a peacekeeping force rather than just, the idea of peacekeeper, not peacemaker bullshit. So I do agree with you 100% on that. And I do think that Rwanda is definitely an eye opener in that. And I'm glad we learned about that and I'm glad the UN did something about Yugoslavia when that broke apart. So we do have that sort of learning process. But I think I would agree with you that human rights violations do need to be taken into account. But I mean, especially by our allies as well. Saudi Arabia is doing all the stuff in Yemen. So
I have to say, Steve, I'm not really sure how to proceed from here because I've never had a debate where I didn't have to interrupt to say stop talking over each other. I don't really know how to.
It's too polite. I got to tell you, you guys know your stuff way more than I would have ever expected two people to come in and have a discussion on this. You're talking about things that I only tangentially remember back in my day because people may know I was in the first Gulf War. This is a brilliant discussion, to be honest with you. I am just flabbergasted that you guys have brought so much to the table that I have to sit and digest 90% of what you are saying right now. But I would like to get some questions if we can. Point.
Oh yeah,
and just so we can have a little bit of a dumpster fire, Steve. I've got Iconoclast at the beginning was asking if we needed somebody to come in to talk about justifying the Iraq War. He has a case, so we'll give him a couple minutes to see why he can just it out. So we'll get him in here. But yeah, let's get to some questions. Steve, do you have any while I pull up super chats?
Well, I just one of the things I had caught, you guys were talking about financial, economic things when it comes to being a presence overseas, and obviously it's very expensive to have troops deployed permanently overseas. We have some troops that are permanently in Japan still. We have troops. We just might be pulling out of Syria. I don't know if we have yet. We have troops deployed in various places because it's very expensive, but it's still more cost effective than sending troops overhead if we need them for whatever case. So, if we do decide to remove troops, should that money stay in the defense budget? Should we use it for other things domestically? Where do you think it should go? Because there's going to be a hell of a lot of money saved by doing that. And should it go somewhere in the military? Should we use it for other things, or do you think that should come out of the defense budget?
I think my policy would be, put it into trying to have universal health care. I think in the U.S. would definitely be one thing. And, having all this money be freed up so we can use it for more domestic things and start to focus a little bit on ourselves. And our infrastructure in the U.S. is actually very poor compared to other countries like in Europe. Our infrastructure gets a grade of like a D. They did a report on that like a couple years ago, and it was very, very bad. So I think working on infrastructure and working on healthcare are two of the things I would say. I don't know about you, Elijah.
All right. Personally, I would point out that we still have some obligations that we are treaty bound to. We are, treaty bound to protect Japan and NATO. And that will require some level of funding to keep military modernized for combat in those regions. So some amount of any money that we would theoretically save on any level of withdrawal should be going to make sure that we keep that should be going to make sure that we keep that we keep up to date and in those regions. In the hypothetical instance of money left over from that type of thing, I would agree. Yes, using them for infrastructure is, and of course for expanding public medicine, are both noble goals if we acquire the money to do so. I will of course disagree with doing the withdrawal, and I would present, by the way, this might throw a little controversy to the wind as an alternative fundraiser eliminating the mortgage interest deduction. It costs us about $10 billion every year and doesn't really do anything except artificially inflate the cost of housing.
Oh, I do agree that, I mean, my biggest thing is also you have to realize that when I'm talking about the military spending and a lot of this stuff, it's also tying into the capitalist ideas of, you know, I think that I like the idea of a 70% marginal tax rate of people making over $10 million, because a lot of times what will happen is people will just hoard all this money instead of trying to pay their workers more. You know, wages have been stagnant since the 80s. So I do think that doing economic reform is also a good idea. But I do realize that we should keep some military. I'm not saying that we should withdraw all military, but we have a lot of military spending that goes to things that we don't really need. There's a lot of military spending on I think that when the Pentagon Papers came out, it was something like the military just straight up lost like $250 billion. So I think the military needs restructuring, which, to be fair, Mattis has done a lot. Unfortunately, he was kind of hawkish and kind of on Syria and kind of got out of there. So I liked Mattis restructuring a lot of the military and streamlining a lot of stuff, but unfortunately, it wasn't enough. So I think we need to cut a lot of the fat out of the military, but still keep our teeth sharp, because the military in the future, with technology, we can have less people do more things, but we still need people to do certain things, because we can't rely on technology as a crutch, as we learned in Vietnam. You know, there's this whole idea of air-to-air missiles are going to make gunfighting illegal, or not illegal, gunfighting basically go away, but the AIM-9 had such a shit effectiveness that it rendered that point moot. So we can't just straight up rely on technology, but we must I think we should shift our focus to ourselves rather than on other countries. That's just my opinion.
Okay. Let's see.
Intellectual iconoclasm has to get on his PC. He tried it on his phone. He's having fits with that, so he's gonna go to his PC. So give him a few minutes here.
Okay, cool. Lysandring says, "Thank you for the super chat as always." 42. That was in reference, I think, to the picking a intro. We'll also be picking an outro. Steve will be picking a number for the outro. So we'll do that before we close out. Pragmatic Culture says, "You should do a debate roulette of just old contentious topics for the fans to regulate." Looking forward to this one in particular. It was great. This was a really good debate.
I'll be perfectly honest, Elijah. I thought this was going to be a dumpster fire, but you came up with some really good points. So I think we all learned something here. I'm glad.
We tried, but couldn't make it happen. Maybe when the other guy comes in, we could all jump on him.
Here's the part where I confess that I have a couple fact checkers helping me.
You guys kicked the shit out. I'm impressed. Yeah, you guys are not just pulling shit out of your ass.
Well, yeah, no, that was the thing. I unfortunately wanted to have my professor who taught a class on Middle East and U.S. policy check over my work, but unfortunately she was unavailable. But I still used a lot of her stuff from her class to kind of formulate what I was talking about. So that's where my at least expertise comes from.
I mean, mine largely, I'll admit yours is, from more formal education than mine. I mostly just read. I mostly read, books from various advisors, and have largely found more kinship among the more hawkish ones.
Okay, that's fair. I think literature is a very, very important aspect of understanding the region. So I think you're on the right track. Actually, question.
Sure.
And no. Oh, I was just going to ask you, have you read Imperial Life in the Emerald City? That's the one book I would recommend that I read that I really liked about Iraq's kind of post-war, the governments of the provisional government and kind of what happened there and kind of the failings of that. I don't know if you've read that. It's a very good book.
I have not, but thank you very much for the suggestion.
Oh yeah, I'm open to any suggestions as well. If you have any good books you want to show out for, I'd be happy to hear them.
Charlotte's Web.
Well, I mentioned Why Nations Fail. It's not particularly based on foreign policy, but Why Nations Fail is a good example of what it takes to construct a prosperous society. So it largely details what the end goals, I think, of any actions we take should be for establishing.
Fair.
The three-edged sword. Thank you for your super chat. Says, am I wrong in thinking that the U.S.-backed Venezuela coup happened on the 33rd day of the U.S. shutdown? Afghanistan is about opium, keeping rare men's from China, and staging points for invasion in Iran.
I don't know if invasion of Iran. I mean, I don't think the U.S. I think the U.S. antagonizes Iran almost a bit too much. I think Iran. I'm kind of mad about Trump ripping up the Iran deal personally, just because it was a good deal and we had a lot of UN supervision and oversight, and just acting like we need to sit here and say Iran's a bad guy, we need to stop them at all costs, I think is just wrong. But I would say Afghanistan, as Elijah pointed out of all the wars in the Middle East, Afghanistan was definitely the most justified and probably the most successful one, because the Taliban was there and the Taliban had direct connections to 9/11. So I do think that of all the wars, it was the most justified. I don't know if I would have done it personally, and I think that it's hard to maintain a presence there. Still, I'm a little bit conflicted about that, because Elijah again made some good points. So I don't know if you want to say anything.
I understand the idea that a direct act of aggression further justifies things like Afghanistan, but we had a long list of justifications for other things. The Iraqi Liberation Act, for example, actually did explicitly cite gross mistreatment and genocide of the of Kurdish populations. Even if the accusations of WMDs were premier in selling the word to the public. One thing I would suggest, though, is aggression should not be the be-all end-all the be-all end-all justification. Because if I could use a historical example, if I could use a historical example, if Japan had never attacked Pearl Harbor, we would never have had an act of aggression to justify entering World War II. We would have done so deliberately to decide the war in favor of a party we liked. So I don't think act of aggression is a necessary justification. Answer the questions. Sorry, I've distracted from the questions. I really have. But I think I do not believe that the United States deliberately engineered the coup in the recent shift in power in Venezuela, and the biggest reason for that is simply because it has been done entirely within legal constitutional terms. It has not necessitated any covert or military action, which is what the CIA would be typically involved in.
Well, hopefully, yeah. Okay. Like if this whole situation in Venezuela, if there was no military action, I think it's fine for the U.S. to just say support a different president. I think that's whatever. My problem is that people have been saying we need to do intervention in Venezuela, and I would say no. If the people want to speak and the people want to speak out, let them speak and let them do it for themselves. We don't really need to draw more bloodshed in than already has been. There's already been people killed in riots and stuff, so I think just having a war would only exacerbate the problem. Okay. But I do agree. I don't think that the CIA orchestrated the coup. I think it was just taking advantage of pre-existing conditions, but we'll see. We'll have to see. I'll have to see when the problem is a lot of times when you have things like this is the papers come out like 20 years later, so it's impossible to really say what exactly to know the whole truth.
Sure. We got to I don't mean to hurry, but we got to get through the rest of these really quickly. So I know that there's a lot to say on this, but let's try to keep them as brief as you can. I'm not going to cut you off, but just keep that in mind. VRCNGTRX says we have not established democracy until the Iraqis and Afghans are able to vote quantumly. Anybody want to comment on that?
Could you repeat the last part of the question?
Quantumly? I'm not exactly...
That's what it says, quantumly. We have not established democracy until the Iraqis and Afghans are able to vote quantumly.
I'm not exactly... He's talking about voting...
exists for that sort of thing?
I'm not sure. Sandring, again, thank you for your super chat. It says the U.S. foreign policy is akin to... oh, man. Aribus teneo lupum.
That means that means holding the wolf by the ears.
It's a Roman thing, I want to say, right?
Yeah. It's what is it? It's when you have like a problem of some kind.
I get it now. Oh, God, Steve, quantum voting.
Oh, quantum voting. Oh, I get it. Okay.
Thank you very much, Glitch, for clarifying that. Yes, quantum voting. You're right. They will not be democracy until they can quantum vote. That's a key point. And then ESO. And then that's an inside joke from the debate that we had last week with Destiny, where Steve proposed that we do quantum voting to crack down on voter fraud. Viva la quantum voting!
Viva la quantum!
And then ESO says, you both have great points and are making me think. So, and that seems to be the sentiment overall of the live chat. I think everybody is happy with that. Okay, so I think that there was earlier today there was a little bit of a miscommunication. I must have heard something wrong last night when we were talking on Steve's channel, because I thought we were going into were we justified to go into Iraq?
That was just me and Elijah's conversation we had a little bit before talking about that. Okay. So I think some of that got lost in communication, and even Elijah and I's conversation. I think our conversation on Reddit didn't have a lot of the nuance that I had here, and I think that we needed that nuance. So it was
definitely. I mean, this was definitely the way to go. I'm just saying, like, I'm just explaining where I'm going with this now, because if you're looking at the title of the video and it's changed from what you saw earlier, that's my fault, because I wasn't really paying attention and went with what I heard last night. But it sparked a comment from the gentleman that I am about to. Oh, there you are. You're on the screen. You're in the super chat window. What's going up, Icon? Can you hear us?
Howdy.
Okay, good. Just making sure you hear us. So you said that you were willing to come on and give a defense for why it was justified to go into Iraq. And the reason that I thought this would be interesting to have is because if you go back and look at the majority of the comments, I'd say like 95%, they were all very stern no's and very, we had no justification. So this was a definitely in the minority opinion. So I'm just interested to hear what case you'll put forth, I guess.
All right. It's simple and it's not so simple. The bottom line is there were honest to God WMDs in Iraq. And I know this because I slept next to a bunker that was so radioactive, we only used it to store fuel, as in gasoline, diesel kind of stuff. Even our biochem guys wouldn't go down in there.
Hold on one second. Let me say this. Let him get his case out, and then I'll let you guys respond how you want to. But don't let him get his case out. All right. All right. Go ahead.
Now, we didn't find much there in that particular bunker. But don't use Google. I've tried using Google. It's a pain in the ass. If you use pretty much any other search engine, you can go and look. The Canadian Department of Energy has a release, and I don't remember which other office it was, but another office had a release talking about how apologetic they were. Yuck, yuck, yuck. Canadians apologizing. But they pulled 500 metric tons of yellow cake out of Iraq, shipped it to Canada, and it's now fueling their reactors right now. And Snopes, if you go to Snopes, they'll say, nope, not a thing. But if you actually go to the governmental offices, you'll actually see that they said, yeah, we actually did this. We didn't tell anyone about it ahead of time because it was a security risk. 500 metric tons is a lot. And when it comes to yellow cake, that's terrifying. Now, before we went in, I'm not going to say that Bush did things right. I'm going to say I think we had a reason to go in. Bush just screwed the pooch, to put it politely. Weeks before we actually went in, there were convoys upon convoys leaving the country, headed to Iran, Syria, other states in the area, and we had insurgent leaders, we had weapons, we had munitions, we had technologies, we had millions of dollars of U.S. stamped gold bullion that was seized leaving, and this was late in the game. Now, we had intel that they were taking out chemical weapons. Where do you think the weapons, the sarin in Syria, or pardon me, not Syria, yeah, in Syria, came from? It left years and years ago. The UN has dragged their heels, hemming and hawing about, was it the rebels, was it Assad? But most of the people I know who I've talked to who are still in the military have the same opinion, that it was stuff that was trucked out of Iraq over a decade ago and is now being used against civilians because Bush screwed the pooch and we did everything wrong, even though we should have been there to deal with this crap. And it's not just because it was there that we should be there, but that's my strongest reasoning that most other people will understand.
Yeah. Can I address that actually? Because I know all about the nuclear stuff. Two things you said, and by the way, I'm actually in agreement with you, and I'm going to get a lot of crap for this, but I think you're dead on. There's one, I know they had chemical weapons for a fact. We actually helped dispose of chemical weapons, which was, we had the news outlet had said we were doing law enforcement operations, but we're really taking chemical weapons to be destroyed off an atoll off of Hawaii. But so yeah, there was chemical weapons involved. But second, the yellow cake you're talking about, which is mostly uranium oxide, yes, they had well over a metric ton of uranium oxide. A lot of that went to store nuclear facilities to be disseminated for research. But we did pull radioactive findings from Iraq. I think this was back in 2004. Yeah, that is a fact. See, here's the thing. There's a couple of things when you talk about the justifications for going to war. When Bush said that they had WMDs, right? Let me finish. In the minds of the people, WMD implies nuclear weapons, right? A dirty bomb using yellow cake is technically not a nuclear weapon. Sarin gas is a WMD. These types of gases are WMDs, but I think there's a difference in scope there. But yes, you're absolutely right. There was radioactive material in Iraq, which they were using to try to get their weapon.
Here's my thing from it. And then guys, I'll let you respond as well. But when in my opinion, when we talk about the justification for going into Iraq, this was tied heavily into the events that happened on September the 11th. It was it was made to seem like this was some sort of retribution for that. We were going in there because they had a hand in what happened to. We basically used that tragedy as a way to get in there, and for whatever reason, whether it be an unsettled score between the former Bush, or because we genuinely thought that there were weapons of mass destruction in there, we were spun a narrative that it was tied to that national tragedy. If September 11th had never happened, I don't think we would have ever walked into Iraq. It would have been a completely different.
Well, Kyle, it's funny you should speak about that, Kyle. Actually, there was we know that after that George H.W. Bush wanted to go into Iraq after the Gulf War. We have there's an article in Time that, by the way, mysteriously went missing in 2002, right before the Iraqi invasion, that was talking about all the reasons why he didn't and why he didn't want to, and a lot of it had to do with the highway of death, and all that sort of thing. So we know that we wanted to go into Iraq before September 11th, and September 11th was just a convenient excuse. So I think that that's very true. Right. The thing about the chemical weapons is that the thing about WMDs, they use WMDs as a very vague term. Like we said, yellow cake is not the same as having a full-blown nuclear missile.
Yeah, it's very low concentration. You have to refine it. They have thousands and thousands of centrifuges using uranium hexafluoride, and it's very expensive and very time consuming to enrich to weapons grade, which is fissionable without help. Like a reactor's the way a complete bomb works is completely different how a plant works, right? I mean, the theory is the same, but you need a much higher grade uranium so you have constant fission, and you don't have to keep it going. You don't have to regulate it as much. You want to uncontrolled chain reactions, basically, what you're looking for, called supercriticality.
Yeah, but we also know that they did have chemical weapons, at least from the Iran-Iraq War, because you have the what is the Kurdish village?
We sold them to them.
I forget.
Yeah. We sold them to them. We know they
exactly. We sold it to them because their war with Iran, because we didn't, like Iran. But at the same time, I don't know how much that the charge that they went into Syria and other nations, I don't know how much of that is true. I don't know if they used a lot of it. Like Syria, I think. Syria, I don't know how much of that is true. That's the tricky thing about this, is that we have to kind of...
He could probably answer it for you.
Oh, yeah. I would love to hear if you have any documentation of that. I would like to see it.
I've been looking for... trying to find data, trying to collect, put together, not a dossier, but just a file of all the crap that I've seen in the mainstream news, and it is so hard to find. Even Fox News, who was rah the whole time, has redacted so much of their crap. I mean, I was watching Fox News way back when early in Iraq, there was talk about finding a cache with 6 or 7 viable biochem scuds, 88 biochem capable chem rounds, and something like 1,600 liters of viable weaponized anthrax. And this was in 0304 time frame. So we know that they were there. I saw the reports myself. I talked to a bunch of my buddies who were in biochem units, and they were still taking crap out. Back in 2010, they were still finding crap and taking it out, and it just wasn't making the mainstream news. And I've been trying to find it, and like I say, it's hard between the right and the left sowing so much BS to make it difficult and spin their own propaganda for their cause. I'm trying, it's not one of those, oh, I was there, just take my word for it. No, I want to have this information, these links to say, here you go, dig in, pick it apart.
Here's a bigger question for everybody. Knowing what we know now, would we still make the same decision? Like, would we destabilize Saddam's power, get him run out and taken out? Because if we look back, it seems like he was sort of he stabilized that. He at least kept the certain factions in check to where you didn't have these, lone, what created ISIS, what became ISIS sprang up in there. So would we leave him in there, or would we still think that he's so evil that we need to take him out?
I think that there's a lot of the problem with the idea of it's so evil that we have to take him out. There's a lot of regimes like that across that even the U.S. supports. I mean, you have back in the 80s, we have the Haitian regime that was doing horrific things to the people of that country, and all other kinds of regimes that don't get talked about a lot because they kind of they are kind of allies with the U.S., but really go against a lot of human rights abuses. Like we were talking a lot about Saudi Arabia. I'm glad we're pulling out with Saudi Arabia, but even then, Trump released a statement earlier that was talking about the Khashoggi murder. He basically said, no, we're going to stay friends with Saudi Arabia because why not? And then he was also saying he wanted to deport the Gulenists to Erdogan. I don't know why you would. Supporting two dictators with one stone makes no goddamn sense. But going on that,
well, if I could offer potential reasoning, a potential motivation for Trump's behavior in the region, regardless of any independent of any claims that he may or may not have been helped, aided, or colluded by any concerted Russian effort, I think it is nonetheless reasonable to say that he is somewhat sympathetic to the interests of Putin's regime and regimes like it. And it is in the best interest of those types of regimes to delegitimize the idea of American intervention, because, put simply, that's what's the biggest. That is what is a threat to them. It is in their best interest to delegitimize the idea that the U.S. should be intervening or responding to human rights abuses.
His best buddies are Kim Jong-il and Putin. I mean, you know.
Well, yeah, I think. Yeah, I think that the problem with that is that also, you're right. It is in Putin's best interest for us to not intervene. But I'm trying to think of what I had a good point, but I just completely forgot about it. I don't know if you guys have anything else to say. I lost my train of thought. I apologize.
I kind of got something. This is Dave. The Russian connection, you can't ignore that, because then you're starting to talk about the seat at the nuclear table. So when you've got Russia out there trying to get a southern port, and they've been trying to get a southern port for a long time, they can sneak subs in past Istanbul, but that's kind of what we're doing there too. Like, there's a bigger picture that seems to be kind of glossed over here, that I think that past presidents have seen that Russia could be a threat, even though it's not the USSR anymore. And now all of a sudden there seems to be this Russia-Trump connection, and I've heard both kind of be a reason that Trump's acting so strangely, and the reason we went into the region in the first place, and we destabilize these things, because if any one of these people allies with Putin, then maybe we're going to have bigger problems.
Well, I mean, that was the thing, is that I think you hit the nail on the head when you were talking about the U.S. does a lot of these same things too. So if we're going to hold other nations accountable and say, oh, these guys are bad, because I do think we're in agreement that a lot of the things that, you know, having authoritarian rulers have nuclear weapons is generally a bad idea. But what's to say, like, even if Trump gets since Trump got elected, you know, what's to say if someone who's just absolutely unhinged gets their finger on a nuclear trigger on our stuff, and then we do all kinds of stuff with destabilizing governments with the CIA as well. Oh, you said something earlier that I wanted to comment on: nuclear submarines.
Think about it. While you think about it, let intellectual. He's got his intellectual. Go ahead.
So here's the issue that a lot of people aren't thinking about when it comes whether Trump Russia is a real thing or not. I'm not touching that, but we have been trying to reach out to Russia for the last two administrations, while at the same time butting heads with Russia. The argument being, if they're our friend, we can mutually de-radicalize from whatever positions we have and come to a more healthy middle ground. Same thing, President Obama did the exact same thing when we look at some of the second and third world dictators that he was literally throwing his arm around and giving huge hugs to and photo ops, with the argument that if we make friends and we give a little bit, we get a little bit. And so part of my problem is, it seems like now that the shoe is on the other foot and we have a Republican saying it, a lot of people are saying, oh my God, a Republican is is compromised. But I think that the part of the problem we have to look at is our individual tribalism, and if we reach out to these people, if we make friends, even with evil men, can we bring evil men closer to the middle, or at the very least, have more influence over their actions so that they are less evil in the long run? That's one of the arguments one of my my poli-sci teachers threw at us.
I think that's a very, very
can we
good
impeach
argument.
the evil?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good argument with the tribalism, like you're saying. Like, if you look at Trump's policy, he's not much different than the past couple presidents we've had. Like Obama had a had a lot of rhetoric on the campaign trail of
what?
He's the most unorthodox president this country has ever had.
Oh, we were
Like
doing
it or
so
hate him,
good.
doesn't matter.
We were
Hold
doing
on, hold
so
on.
fucking
I'm saying-
good.
he's unorthodox in rhetoric only. He's unorthodox in
context.
rhetoric only. He has a lot of the same policies a lot of neoconservatives have. Like, for instance, he's not doing well, he has the wall, and the wall is one big thing. So that's definitely a departure. But his idea of America first and focusing only on American infrastructure has been glossed over, generally speaking, because there's been no infrastructure bills. There's been no any sort of that thing. And you see the more mainstream Republican ideas and bills getting passed in the House and the Senate. So that's what I'm saying. I'm saying is that Trump is just basically the Republican Party without the rhetoric, with just the open rhetoric. He's the bull. He's just what the Republican Party's been doing for years, and he's just the face of whatever. He's not necessarily a huge departure, as everyone would say, because
he is. Yeah,
Yes,
he is.
he is.
Let's be honest. Let's be honest here.
He said that
what?
Kim Jong Un was a lovely man, and that he couldn't wait to meet him again. A guy who is starving literally his country to death.
They fell in love.
Hang
He
on,
will not
hang
say
on.
a word
He does
against.
his foreign policy over Twitter.
He will
That's
say a
literally
word
just
against
it's
Twitter.
all
Over
about the
Twitter.
rhetoric. He doesn't have the whole rhetoric of
Because he has no
Uh,
skills. He's all rhetoric. He has literally no knowledge of anything.
exactly.
I'd like to point out that Trump literally just gave up the shutdown for the ability to have an audience. That's it. He didn't give it up for
Oh, did he?
for friends.
Wait,
on the wall. He
wait,
gave it
really?
to
I haven't read about
have
this.
an
Wait.
audience. He's-
Okay, so he
Yeah.
capitulated to Pelosi because Pelosi denied him to go to the State of the Union address
State of the
in the
And
Senate,
to which
is
he
normally
took her plane
customary.
away. To which he said,
This is
"Okay."
like fascinating.
He said, "Okay, you want to do that?" She was supposed to go on a trip
I
to
didn't
some
know
other
that,
country
really.
yes, in a military plane, and he told her that she was not to take that military plane. If she wanted to fly
God.
economy, that was her prerogative.
It's a bunch of
Well,
kids.
that's what I'm saying.
It's a bunch of fucking kids.
Trump just doesn't have.
This is like the great debate community in politics. Just people. Oh my God, this is freaking hilarious. So wait,
Here's the thing.
he did
Here's the-
capitulate. The shutdown's over, and he's going to give the State of the Union address in the Senate. Is that the?
Here's- And look, and Obama didn't have literally
right.
every single person around him being indicted for something and looked at. You know what I mean? Like you didn't have those people. Like everybody around Trump is falling and squealing.
Lest we
Like-
forget.
like
What about
a-
the Nixon?
Clinton.
What about the Nixon administration? Like
Well-
everything was going on with him, and
Nixon was a drunk. Nixon was
Nah.
a drunk.
I just think that Trump does not have the political skills to really be politically savvy, nor does he really care for that. He doesn't care about that. It's just he just says whatever the fuck he wants, but in reality, he has very little control. He doesn't really do too much of the policy that even he says.
Well, nobody will let
Like,
him. Nobody will let him.
Roger Stone just
you
got
want him
arrested
running
this
anything?
morning. I didn't know that.
Oh,
Roger
yeah.
Stone just got arrested this morning.
He's indicted. Yeah. He got arrested. Now, the shutdown only ended 3 hours ago, so that's why I'm not. I usually check more news, but wow, that's
What?
okay. But man, this is like a
Roger Stone
drama.
won't
You can't
turn
even
on
write
it.
this
Roger
shit. It's like
Stone
the
won't.
worst soap opera.
Roger
God,
Stone won't.
think about this.
It's like if South Park was running
Oh,
the
you're
country.
you're right, Flat Earth Data. You're right, Flat Earth Data. Obama created ISIS. I completely forgot about that. And Hillary
Now,
had emails.
if we talk about Islamic radical terrorism, if we change the rhetoric, you see, then we'll be able to fight it better, obviously, because calling it ISIS or terror instead of saying terrorism, that argument was baffling.
Listen,
stupid.
I will be so glad when we can go back to our boring, upper age, very bland president
Bernie.
again. Like,
Bernie.
give me Mitt Romney. I'll take Mitt Romney now.
Oh God, you really are. Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Really. That's interesting.
Really, that's surprising.
If you really want to know who I'm fanning over, it's probably risky for me to say this given the presence, but given how much it would represent of my ideological convictions. But I'm kind of digging Harris right now.
Sam Harris or who?
Kamala Harris.
Sam
he's talking
Harris.
about. I'm not the biggest fan of Kamala Harris, but I see why you like her. There's a lot of things to like, but I think there's also. I think Joe Biden is also decent. I think I'd rather have Harris.
Biden is probably going to be the lead. I think. Yeah.
Hold
Biden's
on. Let intellectual jump in here. I saw him jump up at Joe Biden. What is it? You don't like Joe?
I was going to say the Republicans played just as dirty as the Democrats, and nobody talked about it. I think that Carly Fiorina would have been a much better candidate, just both for optics, but also not dirty, can get crap done.
No, I don't.
Yeah,
I don't have anything to say. I mean, maybe so.
She's a well-established person. I mean, in her field as far as business. I don't know her political.
But look at her face. Who would vote for that face? Who said that? Our president now said that.
Trump. Yeah, Trump said that.
Right.
Well, it's just
this is the world we live in. The guy who can grab you by the pussy and tell you that you're so ugly that you shouldn't run for president, and we put him in the White House.
Yeah, but then again, you have like Johnson saying more overtly racist thing behind closed doors than Trump is saying like in front of closed doors. What I'm saying is that like this rhetoric has always existed. There's just been a veneer in front of it, and now we're lifting off that mask. It's always been this criticism.
I don't think to that not to the extent that it is now.
Yeah, right. Not to this degree. Now, I agree with you superficially. There's been always this Republican rhetoric, and it's always been behind the scenes and very, kind of just brimming there. But Trump's taken it to a whole new level. I mean, it's exponential. I mean, College Humor couldn't write the skits that Trump has done on his own. I mean, it's just bizarre. Let's be realistic here.
I'd like to mention a little piece of recent political history, and that's in the mid '90s when the immigration debate, particularly regarding Mexico, especially, was starting up. It gained a lot of traction when California passed an incredibly it had passed a grossly unconstitutional law that attempted to control illegal immigration from Mexico. And what ensued was a major debate in Congress over the issue. And I'd like to point out that at the time, there were a lot of Republicans who were supporting massive, who were supporting more relaxed, who were supporting more open immigration policy, particularly for people who were immigrating out of desire for work. And there were some, say, for example, Union Democrats who were supporting restricting immigration to keep wages high. But what's most important is that the outwardly racist rhetoric at the time had been, while still present, was much quieter and still allowed policy talk to prevail. And ultimately, what killed that immigration reform wasn't any particular any racist backlash or outcry, but a special interest group basically just did not. But a special interest group basically just taking apart the bill until it was ineffective, and the entire committee breaking down because after a while people stopped compromising. So yeah, it's not technically it's not new because there was that kind of racist rhetoric during the 90s over that discussion. But what is new is that rhetoric dominating the discussion to the point where you don't see many of those pro-business Republicans who are advocating wider immigration to improve business.
Well, yeah, they've gone further to
I
the
miss
right.
George W. Bush. That's how bad it is. I miss George
God.
W. Bush.
He's got a point.
I mean,
think for Trump any day right now.
The biggest controversy besides his warmongering and that what we talked about tonight here at home, the biggest like news stories were him not being able to pronounce nuclear and the time that guy threw a shoe at him. Like, can you imagine?
Yeah, that was funny though.
Let's not forget.
How did he say it?
The housing bubble. Housing bubble.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
all I'm going to say about Bush.
How do you say it?
Sure.
How do you say that word? How do you say that word?
Nuclear.
You're a Southerner.
Nuclear.
Oh, yeah.
I say
How does Bush
nuclear.
say
I
it?
say it right, but
How does
there
Bush say
was
it?
also the controversy over George W. Bush saying to a family that was working 3 jobs, he's like, "Wow, that's uniquely American."
he said all kind of things, and we've got to wrap this down, guys. We could go on forever, but we've got to wrap this down.
Yeah, this was a great discussion, though. We got to do part 2.
It was.
There's more on this.
And actually,
definitely.
That's what I'm going to leave on. I'm going to close this out on a old George W. Bush quote. Anybody have any last minute thoughts they want to put out there before we say goodnight?
Well, I'm just saying I'd be happy to.
We'll start with intellectual, and then we'll go with Khan, and then Elijah.
I'm going to summarize my opinion of President Bush's military strategy in both theaters with "My enemies failed to underestimate me."
Or mission accomplished.
There we go.
Just kidding. All right,
I was just gonna say I'm perfectly happy to come back. I had actually really enjoyed this conversation. I went in thinking I was going to be banging my head against a wall and dying, but
you guys are great. I'm glad Icon Cast came in here too because he had a lot to add.
Yeah. But I'm just saying I'm willing to come back whenever you want to, Elijah, or just whenever we want to have this conversation again. We can shoot the shit. I'm happy with that.
All right. I welcome this too. I can't guarantee future availability. I'm planning for example, I've got a move coming up. So I might not. So I might be busy with moving preparations. But other than that, I guess really all I have to say is free and recognize Kosovo.
All right, Steve.
I have to come up with a catchphrase or
no, I didn't know if you had any last minute thoughts that you wanted to.
No. Unfortunately, I do got to get going, so we got to wrap this up. But the ongoing saga with Richard Carrier is still ongoing. It seems to be going on my Facebook page right now. If people want to join in on that, Steve McRae Facebook. We've got Stephen Hoyt. We've got Bert Poole. We've got a whole bunch of people. Cam Spires. And a lot of people having at it there, which is having an interesting discussion. So far, I got to tell you, though, not many people are on Richard's side on this. So if you want to take Richard's position, be my guest. But a lot of people are not. So, and I'm trying to suss out his argument. It's not easy to do because he's very boisterous or verbose in his wordings. And I think he could kind of bring it down a little bit so we can kind of understand what he's trying to get across. But yeah, that's what I'm be doing when I get back tonight because I got to head to the store. So let's wrap it up. But you guys are great. This was I thought it was going to be a shit show because when you're talking about these kinds of things, especially when you're talking about war, people lose their shit over it, right? But you guys really didn't at all. And you have both had good argumentation, and I happen to agree with both points, or a lot of points both of you made. This was great. I enjoyed this.
I'm actually going to end on 2 George W. Bush quotes because one is just too good to pass up, and the other is very relevant to tonight's discussion. So thank you guys for joining us. We'll be back here tomorrow at 9:00 for Flatterday night, where Mr. Walker, our CGI expert, will be taking on Wonton. Wonton returns for the first time in 2019. It's been 6 months probably since we've seen him last, but he will be here. So if you want to see a dumpster fire, come tomorrow because our CGI expert has a Photoshop test that Adobe puts out that he's going to take, where he can see if Wonton can spot Photoshop photos. Steve and I are going to take that test as well, and you can take it with us at home. So you're not going to miss that. That's at 9 o'clock tomorrow. Also, at 4 o'clock, we have a private hangout for Patreon, so join us for that. Now, the one relating to tonight. In 2005, George W. Bush said, "One of the hardest parts of my job is to connect Iraq to the war on terror."
Ooh, oh yeah, I think I remember that one.
And the one that I will end on, I mean, you might have to think about this one, but he says, "Our enemies are innovative and resourceful, and so are we. They never stop thinking about new ways to harm our country and our people, and neither do we."
Oh, yeah.
Good night, America. Oh yeah, Steve. I forgot.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a good thing to end on.
Yeah, it's great.
You want everybody to sing Chasing Cars.
I don't have a lighter anymore for that.
Did he do good? Good night, everyone. You can take us
Good
out,
night.
Dave.
Non-sequitur. Your facts are uncoordinated.